going on YouTube? How is everybody today? Good to hear. Today I want to talk about an album by they're a band now called Jonas Reinhardt. The name of the album is Powers of Audition. It was released in 2010 on Kranky Records. Jonas Reinhardt, this is their second album. On their first album, it was just one guy named Jesse Reiner, who was the focal member of the band. Now he's recruited some members of Citay, he's recorded members of Trans Am and a member of this band called Miami to form a quartet. And they released Powers of Audition, their second album. Jonas Reinhardt, I don't know how they got the band name, but they play very synthesized driven, kind of kraut, prog, experimental rock kind of stuff. The main instrument on this is like analog synthesizers that just slowly build and get layered, lots of squishy keyboards and bleeps and bloops, and it's kind of got a atmospheric, spacey sound, but not really. I enjoyed their first album a lot more, even though it was a lot more inconsistent than this one. The first one was so experimental and out there. Each track kind of had a life of their own, distinguishing features, characteristics. You could tell the difference between song to song, which you can on this one. This album is a lot more consistent. With the band, the sound is a little more fleshed out. My ideas might be a little more planned out, but it's also got a lot of the sameness to it, and a lot of difference track to track. They're all kind of, mid-tempo, slow-tempo, kind of quasi-atmospheric tracks with a lot of analog synth, a lot of the weird beeping and keyboard playing and stuff like that, but it's not as enjoyable, it's not as heady as the first one. Jesse Reiner went to Harvard and he studied electronic music at the Electronic Music Center, so maybe if you're a professor of electronic music, you probably get into this. There's probably all kinds of weird equations and maybe that kind of stuff going on here and notation, but just to the layman, just to the average listener like me, it's just kind of like, it's not confounding to listen to. It seems quasi-linear. It's just kind of boring, not as crazy as their first album. There are some standout moments on here for me. A couple songs do accumulate into some sort of, interesting climax, and it gets a little interesting, but I don't know, it's just kind of there. I found myself looking at the clock a lot when I was listening to this. There's not all that much interest going on. There are some interesting tones and sounds and stuff like that, and sometimes things layer kind of cool, but I don't know. I think you'd have to be a big Tangerine Dream fan or a big fan of Klaus Shulze. This guy's very, very influenced by those 1970s kind of synthesizer prog kind of bands like that. But it also makes this music not that original to listen to. It has this very much so a been there, done that kind of feel, nothing new being added. They're not really expanding on their sound. If anything, they're taking a step back from the first one, which had all these ideas after ideas was coming on. This has just maybe one idea, and the musicians play their instruments fine. There's not anything that sounds horrible to listen to, and it all sounds kind of good. The production's all right. The guys know how to play their instruments, but it's just kind of boring. I don't know. I would imagine these guys are very interesting to see live, so you can see how this music's actually made and see how these guys interact with each other would be fine. But just listening to it on an album, it's not overly interesting. It's probably one of those bands that's more fun to play in than actually listen to, I'd say if you're a big John Carpenter fan, or even if you're into zombie a lot and you like that kind of weird, just instrumental stuff that sounds like it's from a science fiction or a horror movie. It's got a very, very vintage sound. But other than that, it's restrained. Things do build up gradually on each track, but like I said, there's nothing too interesting, not a lot of variety in the tracks. You can't really tell the difference between song to song off the top of your head. Nothing stands out too much. It's probably a case of too many cooks in the kitchen, just spoiling the broth. When he's just by himself, he can get a little crazier, but now he's got all these friends and they have to be on the same page, so they can't, be weird and try new things because there's so many people around in other bands and they don't have time to waste. We got to get a song out. I don't know. It doesn't sound amateurish though. Probably looks awesome live. It's only sort of trippy to listen to. There's a lot of lulls. This album is very restrained. I don't know. Album artwork here. Just a blurry picture of them playing their songs. I assume that's the band. And then we got someone in a microphone and someone staring at them. Great. It's 7 tracks on the album. The album's about 38 minutes long. We got a picture of a guy with sunglasses. Soak it all in. And then just the credits where it was recorded. It was recorded in San Francisco. Was it? Just want to make sure. I know they're from San Francisco. Yeah, it was recorded in San Francisco. But yeah, if you're really into sequenced rhythms, analog synthesizers, Tangerine Dream, that whole 1970s instrumental kind of soundscapes kind of music, cluster, John Carpenter, all that kind of stuff. You know, it's proggy, it's krautrocky, but it's also not great, not too terribly original, no new ideas that I could pick up on. But it wasn't bad either. It was just kind of there, you know. If it's your bag, you probably get into this, but I don't know. I'd check out, if you want to check out these guys, check out their first album. It was self-titled, it was alright. It was still on Kranky too. Anyway, Jonas Reinhardt, Powers of Audition, 2010, Kranky Records, kind of meh.